Hello guys, good afternoon. We are the group 5 and our topic for today is about community ecology. Community interactions. What is community? A community is the biotic component of an ecosystem. It consists of population of different species that live in the same area and interact with one another. Species interactions are important biotic factors in ecological systems. There are three major types of community interactions. Number one is the predation. Predation is a relationship in which members of one species, the predator, consume members of other species, the prey. Competition is a relationship between organisms that strive for the same limited resources. The resources might be food, nesting sites, or territory. And the third one is the symbiosis. Symbiosis is a close association between two species in which at least one species benefits. For the other species, the outcome of the association may be positive, negative, or neutral. So, in this figure, you can see the lion and the Cape buffalo. So, in this figure 1, you can see the Cape buffalo and lion, and this is the classic example of predators and prey. In addition to the lions, there is one another predator in this figure. So, the other predator is the Cape buffalo. Like the lion, it consumes prey species. In this case, species of grasses, predator-prey relationship account for most energy transfers in food chains and webs. There are type of predators. The lions in figure 1 are true predators and true predation. Predator kills its prey. Some true predators, like lions, catch large prey and then dismember and chew the prey before eating it. Other true predators catch small prey and swallow it whole. For example, snakes swallow the mice whole. And some predators are not true predators because they do not kill their prey. Instead, they graze on their prey. And grazing, a predator eats part of its prey but rarely kills it. For example, deer graze on plants but do not usually kill them. Animals may also be grazed upon. For example, female mosquitoes suck tiny amounts of blood from animals but do not harm them, although they can transmit disease. Predations and population. True predators help control the size of prey population. This is especially true when a predator preys on just one species. Generally, the predator-prey relationship keeps the population size of both species in balance. So this is shown in figure 2. In figure 2, every change in population size of one species is followed by a corresponding change in the population size of the other species. Generally, predator-prey populations keep fluctuating in this way as long as there is no outside interference. As the prey population increases, the predator populations starts to rise. With more predators, the prey population starts to decrease, which in turn causes the predator population to decline. This pattern keeps repeating. There is always a slight lag between changes in one population and changes in the other population. Adaptations to predation. Both predators and prey have adaptation to predation. Predator adaptations help them capture prey. Prey adaptations help them avoid predators. A common adaptation in both predator and prey species is camouflage or disguise. One way of using camouflage is to blend in with the background. Several examples are shown in this figure. So this is the figure 3. So can you see the crab and the photo on the left? It is camouflage with algae. The praying mantis in the middle photo looks just like the dead leaves in the background. So the stripes on the zebras in the right photo blend the animals together, making it hard to see where one zebra ends and another begins. Another way of using camouflage is to look like a different, more dangerous animals. Using appearance to mimic another animal is called mimicry. So this is the figure 4, and in these pictures, this is shown as an example of mimicry. The moth in the figure has markings on its wings that look like the eyes of an owl. When a predator comes near, the moth suddenly displays the markings. This startles the predator and gives the moth time to fly away. The moth on the left mimics the owl on the right. So this disguise helps protect the moth from predators. Some prey species have adaptations that are the opposite of camouflage. They have bright colors or other highly noticeable traits that serve as a warning for their predators to stay away. Like for example, is some of the most colorful butterflies are poisonous to birds. So the birds have learned to avoid eating them. By being so colorful, the butterflies are more likely to be noticed and avoided by their predators. Competitions. Competitions is a relationship between organisms that strives for the same limited resources. The resources might be food, nesting sites, or territory. Two different types of competitions are intraspecific and interspecific competitions. Intraspecific competitions occurs between members of the same species. For example, two male birds of the same species might compete for mates in the same territory. So, intraspecific competition is a necessary factor in natural selection. It leads to adaptive changes in a species through time. Interspecific competitions occurs between members of different species. So, for example, is two predator species might compete for the same prey. Interspecific competitions takes place in communities of interacting species. It is the type of competitions referred to in the rest of this section. Interspecific competitions and extinctions in nature's interspecific competition has often led to the extinctions of species. Um, when population of different species in a community depend on the same resources, there may not be enough resources to go around. If one species has a disadvantage, such as more predators, it may get fewer of the necessary resources. So, as a result, members of that species are less likely to survive, and the species will have a higher death rate than the other species. Fewer offspring will be produced, and the species may eventually die out in the area. For example, is rabbits were introduced into Australia in the mid-80s for sport hunting. Rabbits had no predators in Australia and quickly spread throughout the continent. Many species of Australian mammals could not successfully compete with rabbits and were extinct. interspecific competition, and specialization. Another possible outcome of interspecific competition is the evolution of traits that create distinct differences among the competing species. Natural selection's competing species can become more specialized. This allows them to live together without competing for the same resources. An example of this is the anolis lizard. Um, Many species of anolis live and prey on insects in tropical rainforest. Competition among the different species lead to the evolution of specializations. Some anolis evolve specialization to prey on insect and live later on the forest floor. Others evolve specialization to prey on insects on the branches of trees. So this is allowed the different species of anoles to coexist without competing. The last part of community interaction are the symbiosis. Symbiosis is a close association between two species in which at least one species benefits. For the other species, the outcome of the association may be positive, negative, or neutral. So, there are three basic types of symbiotic relationship: the mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. Mutualism Mutualism is a symbiotic relationship in which both species benefit. The good example for this is a lichen. A lichen is not a single organism but a fungus and an alga. The fungus absorbs water from air and minerals from rock or soil. The alga uses the water and minerals to make food for itself and the fungus. So another example involves is the gobby fish and shrimp. So you can see the figure 5. As you can see, the figure 5 blind shrimp and the fish spend most of their time together. So the shrimps maintains a burrow in the sand in which both the goby and the shrimps live. When a predator comes near, so kapag ang predator daw is lumapit sa kanila, the fish touches the shrimp with its tails as a warning. Then both fish and shrimp retreat to the burrow until the predator is gone. Age gains from this mutualistic relationship. So the shrimp gets a warning of approaching danger and the fish gets a safe home and a place to lay its eggs. So mutual lang. Commensalisms. Commensalism is a symbiotic relationship in which one species benefits while the other species is not affected. In commensalisms, one animal typically uses another for a purpose other than food. So, for example, mites attach themselves to larger flying insects to get a prey ride, and hermit crabs use the shells of dead snails for shelters. Co-evolution explains some commensal relationship. An example is the human species and some of the species of bacteria that live inside humans. Through the natural selections, many species of bacteria have evolved the ability to live inside the human body without harming it. Parasitism Parasitism is a symbiotic relationship in which one species, the parasite, benefits while the other species, which is the host, is harmed. Some parasites live on the surface of their host, others live inside their host. entering through a break in the skin or in food or water. For example, roundworms are parasites of the human intestine. So, the worms produce high numbers of eggs, which are passed in the host species to the environment. Other humans may be infected by swallowing the eggs and contaminated food or water. So this is usually happens only in places with forced sanitations. Some parasites eventually kill their host. However, most parasites do not. So parasitisms in which the host is not killed is a successful way of life and very common in nature. About half of all animal species are parasitic in at least one stage of their life cycles. So many plants and fungi are parasitic during some stages as well. Not surprisingly, most animals are host to one or more parasites. So that's for the community interactions. So let's move to diversity and trophic and structures characterize biological communities to be reported by um, Francis Miguel Martir.
Diversity and trophic structure characterize biological communities. Species diversity, the number and relative abundance of species in a community. Number 1. Species richness, number of different species. Relative abundance, proportional abundance of different species in a community. Greater diversity, greater stability. Greater diversity offers more food resources, more habitats, more resilience in face of environmental change. The impact of reduced biodiversity. Agricultural monoculture and all field. So as you can see in agricultural monoculture has a plants and the all field has a dead branches, dead trees and grass. So that means agricultural monoculture is much nicer than old field. Trophic structure 1. Every ecosystem has a trophic structure, a hierarchy of feeding relationships which determines the pathway for energy flow and nutrient cycling. Producers occupy the first level and directly or indirectly support all other levels. Producers derive their energy from the sun in most cases. Hydrothermal vent communities are an exception. The producers are chemosynthetic bacteria that derive energy by oxidizing hydrogen sulfide. Trophic structure 2. All organisms other than producers are consumers. Consumers are ranked according to the trophic level they occupy. First order, consumers rely directly on producers for their energy. A special class of consumers, the detritivores, derive their energy from a detritus representing all trophic levels. Photosynthetic productivity sets the limit for the energy budget of an ecosystem. Organization of trophic levels. Trophic structure can be described by trophic level or consumer level. So in the first level, consumer is not applicable. In the second, first order for the consumer level. So in the third trophic level, the consumer is the second order, and in the fourth level, the consumer is the third order. In short, producer, herbivore, carnivore, and carnivore. Major trophic levels: producers, solar energy, green plants, photosynthetic protists, and bacteria. Herbivores, producers, grasshopper, water fleas, antelope, and termites. Primary carnivores, herbivores, wolves, spiders, some snakes, and warblers. Secondary carnivores. Primary carnivores, killer whales, tuna, and falcons. Omnivores, several trophic levels, humans, rats, opossums, bears, raccoons, crabs. Detritivores and decomposers, waste and dead bodies of other organs. Fungi, many bacteria, earthworms, and vultures. 2. Type of pyramid biomass, abandoned field and ocean. The producers of ocean is less than the producers of the abandoned field, but greater than in primary consumer, secondary consumer, and tertiary consumers. Food chains, the sequence of organisms, each of which is a source of food for the next, is called a food chain. Food chains commonly have 4 links, but seldom more than 6. In food chains, the arrows go from food to feeder. Limits on a food chain's length. 2 hypotheses. Number 1, energetic suggests it's limited by the inefficiency of the energy transfer along the chain. Number 2, dynamic stability populations. Fluctuation at the lower trophic levels are magnified at higher levels, potential causing the local extension of top predators. Biological magnification is the accumulation of chemicals in the living tissues of consumers in the food chain. Food webs. The different food chains in an ecosystem tend to form complex web of feeding interactions called a food web. A simple lake food web. Energy transformations. Green plants, algae, and some bacteria use the sun's energy to produce glucose in a process called photosynthesis. The chemical energy stored in a glucose fuels metabolism. The photosynthesis that occurs in the ocean is the vital life on Earth, providing oxygen to absorb carbon dioxide. Cellular respiration is the process by which organisms break down energy-rich molecules to release the energy in a usable form. Producers are able to manufacture their food from simple inorganic substances. Producers include green plants, algae, and other photosynthetic protists and some bacteria. Consumers are organisms that feed on autotrophs or on other heterotrophs to obtain their energy. Includes animals, heterotrophic protists, and some bacteria. Decomposers are consumers that obtain their nutrients from the breakdown of dead organic matter. They include fungi and soil bacteria. Primary production. The energy entering the ecosystems is fixed by the producer's photosynthesis. Gross primary production, or GPP, is the total energy fixed by a plant through photosynthesis. NPP, or net primary production, is the GPP minus the energy required by the plant for respiration. It represents the amount of stored chemical energy that will be available to consumers in an ecosystem. Productivity is defined as the rate of production. NPP, or net primary productivity, is the biomass produced per unit area per unit time. Measuring plant productivity. The primary productivity of an ecosystem depends on a number of interrelated factors such as light intensity, temperature, nutrient availability, water, and mineral supply. The most productive ecosystems are systems with high temperatures, plenty of water, and non-limiting supplies of soil nitrogen. Ecosystem productivity. The primary productivity of oceans is lower than the terrestrial ecosystem because the water reflects much of the light energy before it reaches unutilized by the plant. Secondary production. Secondary production is the amount of biomass at higher trophic levels. It represents the amount of chemical energy in consumers' food that is converted to their own new biomass. Energy transfers between producers and herbivores, and between herbivores and higher level consumer is inefficient. Ecological efficiency. The percentage of energy transferred from one trophic level to the next varies between 5% and 20% and is called the ecological efficiency. An average figure of 10% is often used. This 10% law states that the total energy content of a trophic level in an ecosystem is only about 1/10 of the preceding level. Energy flow into in and out of each trophic level in a food chain can be represented on a diagram using arrows of different sizes to represent the different amounts of energy lost from particular levels. The energy available to each trophic level will always equal the amount entering the trophic level minus total losses to that level. Ecological succession is the process by which communities in a particular area change over time. Succession takes place as a result of complex interaction of biotic and abiotic factors. Past community. Some species in the past community were outcompete or did not tolerate altered by abiotic condition. Present community. The present community modifies such as abiotic factors as light intensity and quality, wind speed and direction, air temperature and humidity, soil composition and water content. Future community. Changing condition in the present community will allow new species to become established. This will make up the future community. Early successional communities, characterized by simple structure with a small number of species interactions, broad niches, low species diversity. Primary succession refers to a colonization of a region where there are no pre-existing community. Examples include newly emerged coral atolls, volcanic islands that newly formed a glacial moraines islands. A classical sequence of colonization begins with a lichens, mousses, liverworts, progresses to ferns, grasses, shrubs, and culminates in a climax community of mature forests. In reality, this scenario is rare. Secondary succession occurs where an existing community has been cleared by a disturbance that does not involve complete soil loss. Such disturbance events include cyclone damage, forest fire, and hillside slips. Because there are still soil present, the ecosystem recovery tends to be more rapid than primary succession, although the timescale depends on the species involved and the climatic and edaphic factors. Human disturbance. Any humans may deflect the natural course of succession through controlled burning, mowing, and grazing livestock. The resulting climax community will differ from the natural community.
Disturbance influence species diversity and composition. What is disturbance? A disturbance changes a community by removing organisms or changing resource availability, fire, drought, flood, storm, and human activity. In other words, a disturbance is a removed organism from it. Fire is a significant disturbance in most terrestrial ecosystem. A high level is disturbance is the result of high intensity and high frequency of disturbance. Examples:
Succession predictable changes that occur in community over time. Decades ago, most ecologists favored the view that communities are in states of equilibrium. The view was supported by F.E. Clements, who suggested the species in a climax community function as a superorganism. How does disturbance influence species diversity? Disturbance affects species diversity. Species diversity is low at low disturbance frequency because of competitive exclusion. At high disturbance frequency, species diversity is predicated to be low because only with the species that quickly colonize and reach maturity are able to survive. What type of disturbance have the greatest impact on biodiversity? The pattern of change in biodiversity metrics are consistent among different types of disturbance. K disturbance has the most severe effects, followed by D disturbance, and B disturbance has nearly negligible effect.
Biogeographic factors affecting community biodiversity. What is biogeography? It's a branch of geography that studies the past and present distribution of the world's many species. The study of the geographic distribution of plants, animals, and other forms of life. It is concerned not only with habitation patterns but also with the factors responsible for variations in distribution. So it is usually considered to be a part of physical geography as it often relates to the examination of the physical environment and how it affects species and shapes their distribution across space. So there are three types of biogeography: historical biogeography, ecological biogeography, and conservation biogeography. Historical biogeography reconstruct the origins, dispersal, and extensions of taxa and biotas. So specifically, historical biogeography combines the current geographic location of species with evolutionary relationships to infer their evolutionary history through space and time. Ecological biogeography accounts for the present distributions in terms of interactions between organisms and their physical and biotic environments. Some examples of ecological factors that are commonly studied include climate, habitat, and primary productivity. Moreover, ecological biogeography differs from historical biogeography in that it involves the short-term distribution of various organisms rather than the long-term changes over evolutionary periods. Conservation biogeography work on the protection and restoration of natural environments to seek to effectively manage the current level of biodiversity throughout the world by providing policymakers with data and potential concern regarding conservation biology. The five basic historical biogeography methods are dispersalism, phylogenetic biogeography, panbiogeography, cladistic biogeography, and parsimony. Number one, dispersalism derives from the traditional concepts of center of origin and dispersal. Dispersal is important for any species, whether free-living or parasitic, because a population restricted to one small area risks becoming extinct if conditions become unfavorable, and because this dispersal reduces inbreeding and the use of evolutionary adaptability. Number two, phylogenetic biogeography applies the rules of progress and division to elucidate the history of the geographical distribution of a group. The history of the evolution of a species or group, especially in reference to lines of descent and relationships among both groups of organisms. Number three, biogeography consists of plotting distributions of different taxa on maps, connecting their distribution areas together with lines called individual tracks and looking for coincidence among individual tracks to determine generalized tracks. Number 4. Cladistic biogeography assumes a correspondence between taxonomic relationships and area relationships. Number 5. Parsimony analysis of endemicity classifies areas by their shared taxa analogous to characters according to the most parsimonious solutions. In general, parsimony is the principle that the simplest explanation that can explain the data is to be preferred. In the analysis of phylogeny, parsimony means that a hypothesis of relationships that requires the smallest number of character genes is most likely to be correct. Biogeographic factors affecting the biodiversity of communities. Number 1. Community biodiversity measures the number of species and their relative abundance. The variety of different kinds of organisms that make up a community has two components, species richness and relative abundance. Species richness, the total number of species in the community. Relative abundance of the different species. So species richness may be equal but relative abundance may be different. Community 1, A 25%, B 25%, C 25%, D 25%. Community 2, A 80%, B 5%, C 5%, and D 10%. Number 2. Species richness generally declines along an equatorial polar gradient. Tropical habitats support much larger numbers of species of organisms than do temperate and polar regions. Number 3. Species richness is related to a community's geographic size. So the species area curves quantifies what may seem obvious. The larger the geographic area, the greater the number of species. Number 4. Species richness on an island depends on the island size and distance from the mainland. Because of their size and isolation, islands provide great opportunities for studying some of the biogeographic factors that affect the species diversity of communities. Robert MacArthur and E. O. Wilson developed a hypothesis of island biogeography to identify determinants of species diversity on an island. Two factors will determine the number of species that eventually inhabit the island. The rate at which new species immigrate to the island and the rate at which species become extinct. A. Immigration and extinction rates. As an island fills up with species, immigration declines and extinction increases until they offset each other at an equilibrium level. At the level, the rate of continuing immigration is just cancelled by the rate of continuing extinctions, and there is no net gain or loss of species. B. Effect of island size. C. Effect of distance from mainland. Biodiversity within a given ecosystem will be affected by a number of biographic factors. Larger habitats tend to promote biodiversity better than smaller habitats. Ecology at the edges of ecosystems is different from central areas. This is known as the edge effect, whereby species distribution is influenced by the divergent environmental conditions. Each tend to have greater biodiversity as different habitats with different abiotic factors exist in close physical proximity. However, each tend to have more competition than central regions, which may restrict survival prospects of certain species. Habitat corridors between parts of a fragmented habitat can connect disparate regions to improve genetic diversity. These principles are routinely applied when setting aside land as a nature reserve to improve the conservation of biodiversity. General biogeographic principle of a nature reserves. Size, age effect, other. Large size is better. Reserves with less age are better than those with more. Clustered reserves are better than fragmented and isolated reserves. Habitat corridors are good. Heterogeneity is defined as the number and proportions of different cover types, compositional heterogeneity, and their complex spatial arrangement configurational heterogeneity in the landscape. Landscape heterogeneity has long been considered a key determination of biodiversity. Between landscape heterogeneity and species richness from positive to negative, and the negative effect is often reported to be the result of landscape fragmentation. Metrics of landscape heterogeneity can also be regarded as good surrogates of species diversity because in ecology, habitat diversity is associated with an increase in niche availability for species. Such association can also depend on special skills observed to effectively manage heterogeneous landscapes to maintain biodiversity, so we need to understand the mechanisms of such variability in the associations between landscape heterogeneity and species richness at multiple spatial scales.